So I just wanted to thank the Rav again for giving up his time to answer all our questions. I failed to mention last time that it's very clear, not just that the Rav turns up to answer questions, but also clearly carried out a lot of research into the answers beforehand. So we're very grateful. And I also forgot to thank last time Binyamin Lenkin, who is now, as well as he always does, posting videos to the YouTube channel, also timestamping them to make it much easier for people to make use of the videos and find the answers to their questions. I'm going to start with the first one. There's no theme to this Q&A. It's just all the remaining questions that were submitted in the last round. The first one is from Joseph in Yavne. Can one start Seder, this is Leila Seder, at Plaga Mincha? If so, is there a concern about the possibility of eating matzah before Seder hakochavim? The Rav's video about bringing Shabbat and Yom Tov in early sounds like it applies to all Yamim Tovim.
Very well. First of all, allow me to begin by stating that I'm very pleased that there are so many people who make it their business to bother me, in inverted commas, of course, with all these questions. That is why we are all here, not just myself, all of us together. We're all here for that reason, to learn Torah. And I too learn quite a lot from the questions and looking up sometimes various sources and information in order to, B'ezrat Hashem, answer them to the best of my ability. So, Mikol Melamadai Hiskalti. So let's begin. The video that Yosef refers to, as I recall, was directed at the question specifically of beginning the meal early on Shavuot. In other words, as one may bring in Shabbat early, the question is, can this be done on all Yamim Tovim? And particularly, the question has been raised by some poskim and by people in general, can it be done on the Leil Shavuot because of the issue of Hamishim Yom, have to be Yamim Tamimim, etc., etc. So there, the answer I gave was that it is definitely mutar to begin the meal, to make chidush, to begin the meal Leil Shavuot before the end of the day, before it is really night. According to the Torah, it is mutar to do so. Now, this question, therefore, is asking, what about Leil Seder? Is Leil Seder different? The answer is yes, it is different. Why is it different? For two reasons. There are two mitzvot which we have, which we perform Leil Seder, which must be done at night. The first mitzvah is, as Rambam writes in Hilchot Hametz u'Matzah, the beginning of Perek Shishi, Perek Well, Halacha Aleph, Mitzvah Ta'aseh min HaTorah, says Rambam, Le'echol matzah b'leil hamisha asar. Right, b'leil hamisha asar has to be on the night of the 15th of Nisan. If one eats matzah before the night of the 15th, half an hour before, an hour before, it doesn't make a difference. One was not mekayem the mitzvah, because it has to be on that night when the Korban Pesach is eaten, and at the same time that there's the second mitzvah involved here, is the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, which Rambam writes about in Perek Zayin, in Hilchot Hametz u'Matzah, and I will just quote what he says, Mitzvah Aseh Shel Torah. It is a mitzvah min HaTorah lesaper b'nisim u'niflaot shena'asu la'avotenu b'Mitzrayim b'leil hamisha asar b'Nisan. Here too, it speaks about the night of the 15th. Rambam continues, Shene'emar zachor at yom hazeh asher yasatem, has to be this particular day, the 15th, which is when we left Mitzrayim. Kamo shene'emar zachor at yom hashabbat. ומניין שבליל 15 תלמוד לומר והגעת לבנך ביום ההוא לאמור בעבור זה בשעה שיש מסע ומרור מונחים לפניך. So this mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim goes together with the mitzvah of Achilat Matzah and Maror and Bezrat Hashem under normal circumstances, that is to say when very confused or misguided, or in some cases downright evil individuals are ruling over Am Yisrael and preventing them from bringing a Korban Pesach, as is the case today. Under normal circumstances, therefore, we have a Korban. We certainly have Matzah and Maror even today. And there's the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, which is a mitzvah today as well. There are, in fact, only two mitzvot minat Torah that we perform nowadays. Belela Seder. One is Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, and the other is Achilat Matzah. These two mitzvot have to be done at night. So, practically speaking, if one wishes to begin as early as one might begin, what can one do? One can begin the Seder, which involves all kinds of preparations and people getting themselves organized, and just getting people around the table sometimes takes a while. So people can wash their hands. If you really want to get on with things, I would recommend washing your hands before Kiddush, which is Bichlal Minhag, which I prefer personally, which can be done all year round. It can also be done Leila Seder, or you can wash their hands after the Kiddush, it doesn't matter. Kiddush, Belela Seder can be done just like any other Shabbat or Yom Tov. It can be done before it is Mamash Sefer Hakochavim, before it is really night, according to the Torah, Lefi Halacha. And then by the time you get down to then you have the Yirakoth, right? Sha'ar Yirakoth, or eat at the beginning. That can be done before, even if it's not Mamash Tzedek Kochavim. I think that is mutar, because there's only L'Shem Heker, so that people take note that something is different and unusual. And by the time you actually get to the beginning of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, and then later eating the matzah and the maror, it will be Sefer Kochavim. So you can begin all of this process with the Kiddush, shall we say. You can begin 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes before Sefer Kochavim. Earlier than that, it is not possible.
However, it's not possible because it would result in one doing Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim before Sefer Kochavim, or it's not possible intrinsically?
For the reasons that we mentioned. A, Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. B, Achilat Matzah. These are two mitzvot min HaTorah, which we are still able to perform today. There might be room to be mekel when it comes to eating maror today, which is not min HaTorah, because there's no korban. Maror is only min HaTorah when there's a korban Pesach. And there's no korban Pesach today at this present time. So those two mitzvot, Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim and Achilat Matzah, which are min HaTorah, have to be done at night. So if you begin with Kiddush and the other goings on that take place at the table until you actually get to the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, which begins before the Matzah, so you might be able to get a little bit before Sefer Kochavim, but not from Plata Mincha, because then you're likely to get to these mitzvot much too early.
Right. Thank you, Harav. The next question was anonymous. Anonymous in New York City. Given that the sun does not travel under the earth during the night, do we still need to draw water for baking matzah during the day and leave it in a container overnight?
So it's a very good question. And one can explain the halacha of mayim shelanu as essentially referring to using water to make matzah, which is not warm, certainly not hot, and not warm, and not even lukewarm, but it has to be cold. Cold doesn't mean freezing, but it has to be cold. Now, in warm climates, water drawn from a body of water that's outside under the sun, shall we say, might be in some kind of a pool or reservoir of water. The water might be warmed up during the day. by the sun. And that is essentially what the halakha is referring to. One doesn't have to understand that it's referring to the astronomical model of the sun traveling beneath the earth during the night. The Rambam, who brings this halakha in Perek Hey of Hilchot Hametz Matzah, certainly knew the basic facts of astronomy when it comes to this question of where is the sun and where is the earth relative to each other, and where does the sun go during the night. And nevertheless, the Rambam brings this halakha. So if we understand it in those terms, it doesn't matter whether we know that the sun does not travel under the earth during the night. We understand that the ikar is that the water be cool. Now, therefore, a person may say, well, in that case, nowadays we have a fridge. We have other ways of keeping water cool. And therefore, it doesn't really matter if the water was drawn the day before and kept in a jug during the night, because the idea there was that the temperatures at night drop. And therefore, by the morning, having been out all night, that water will be as cool as you're likely to get it. And the answer to that question is basically that's true. In other words, it seems to me that the fi hadin, we should say that if the water is cold, it should be mutar. Whether if it comes from a tap and the water comes out of the tap cold, or whether the water was kept in a fridge. And it's not essential that it have been kept out or taken out from a tap or from wherever the water came and placed in a bottle or in a container, and having spent the night in a separately or in some place not outside. That I don't think really is so essential today. I think the simplest thing is to put the water in the fridge, and then you know the water comes out cold. And that's what I do. Nevertheless, my practice is to fill up some bottles with water the day before. I usually make the matzah on Leil for the Seder, Leil b'dikat hametz, after b'dikat hametz. So I usually do this the day before, and I put it in a bottle and I keep it in the fridge. So the water comes out of the fridge quite cold, and that's the water we use for making the matzah. Halakha l'ma'aseh, if one looks up the Haggaoth Maimoniyot on the Rambam there in Perek Hey Milchot Hametz Matzah, you will see there are a couple of opinions amongst the Rishonim who hold that mayim shelanu, but the avad at least is not ma'akev. It's not the matzah is not asur. This is the opinion of Rashi, by the way. The question in the Talmud whether there is a statement, like shall we say this way, there is a statement in the Talmud which can be understood in more than one way. According to Rashi and some other Rishonim, it does not apply to mayim shelanu. In other words, the matzah is mutar, even if mayim shelanu were used, as long as the water is not known to have been very warm. So, practically speaking, I suggest filling the bottle or the container with water the night before. But if that was not possible or was forgotten, it wasn't done, I think it is mutar to use water that is cool to make matzah under all circumstances.
Thank you, Harav. The next question was from me. Is Play-Doh that contains flour and water to be considered hametz, and should it be discarded before Pesach?
Very well. So, because of this question, I admit I'm not an expert in the ingredients of Play-Doh, but I looked it up today. So what I discovered is that, yes, there's definitely flour and water in Play-Doh, but there is also salt, a lot of salt, in fact. There is also borax. There's also petroleum additives, sometimes kerosene or petroleum additives, also known as mineral oil. There are various additives and ingredients in Play-Doh which definitely mean that it is not not ra'ui la'achila. It's not impossible to ingest it, and it will not kill you, but it's not healthy. And I even saw a source where it says if a dog ingested it, then you should definitely, go to a vet and see what can be done. It's not healthy. It's not, and that's called lo ra'ui la'achila. So the halacha is, Rambam speaks about this in Ilchot Hametz Matzah Perek Daled. In general, Rambam says as follows: when you have a ta'arovet hametz, you have something, a substance which has in it hametz mixed with other things. If it's a ta'arovet shene'echelet, that it is edible, it's designed to be edible. It's a food, something which people eat. It has hametz and it has other ingredients in it as well. Then you're not allowed to have it in your possession over Pesach. You are over on Bal Yira'eh Bal Yimaseh if you do have it in your possession. But if it is not Ra'u L'Achila, says Rambam, Harei Zeh Mutar L'Kaimo B'Pesach. So if it's not Ra'u L'Achila, you may keep it in your house, in your possession. That's okay during Pesach. And I think Play-Doh is precisely such a substance. Rambam also says later in Halacha Yod Bet, Davar Shenit Arev Bo Hametz, Ve'eno Ma'achal Adam Kalal. Now, I don't think anybody would claim that Play-Doh is a Ma'achal Adam. I mean, children might sometimes take a bite of it, but children eat all sorts of things. Little young children, including the sand in the sand pit in the park. So that doesn't prove anything if children might put that in their mouth. But it's not a Ma'achal Adam. And Rambam mentions triak, which is a kind of concoction, a medical concoction, which has hametz in it and other things as well, but it's not a ma'achal adam, and it's not very good for you. So even though you're allowed to keep it in your possession, you're not allowed to eat it deliberately during Pesach, but you are allowed to keep it in your possession, and it's not a sword anyway.
Thank you, Harav. The next question is from Shlomo Pratha in Mill Valley. Does drip irrigation and other forms of modern automatic irrigation count as water mills for the purposes of labor on chol hamoed?
I'm not certain I fully understand the question. In other words, what exactly does the person do in this case with such automatic irrigation? If it's automatic, then apparently it doesn't have to do anything. So I'm not quite sure what the question is, but let's go over the basics of malacha on cholo shel moed. The klal is, the rule of thumb is that when the Torah says mikra kodesh, it refers also to the intermediate days, the cholo shel moed. So even though those days are not considered a yom shabbathon, so it says with regards to Pesach, shall we say, the first day and the seventh day are a shabbathon, but the intermediate days are also called mikra kodesh. And this is the zman for bringing the korban hagigah and the mikdash. And these days, therefore, are not to be considered or made like just any other day of the year, because these are special days and they have a kedusha about them. And therefore, according to the Yerushalmi, according to the Rambam, midivrei sefarim, an explicit gezerah was made not to do melacha on cholo shel moed. However, having said that, Rambam says in Ilchot chol hamoed, which is in Ilchot Shmitat Yom Tov, Perek Zayin, I believe, kol melacha she'im lo ya'aseh ota b'moed yeh sham hefsed harbe osim ota. Any melacha which, if it is not done now during the moed, will result in hefsed harbe. In other words, there will be clear economic loss. In other words, produce in the field or olives that have to be dealt with in a certain way. They're in the middle of being pickled or soaked, etc., as part of the pickling process, and he has to do certain things with those olives, for example. If you don't do them now, they'll be ruined. Then you do it. Torah harbe, as long as it does not involve too much exertion and physical labor. All right. So any melacha which falls within that category of not being Torah harbe, not being too obvious an exertion and physical activity, prolonged physical activity, and that which, if not done now, will result in loss, or the bal tashchit, or the produce or the other product in question will be destroyed, or will no longer be of any value. That is mutar b'chol hamoed. Anything else which is not fit into those definitions is not to be done on chol hamoed. Those are the rules. Now, modern automatic irrigation, again, I don't know exactly what is going on. If it means he has to check that the timer, that there's some kind of electronic system with some kind of a clock which he has to check to make sure it's functioning properly, or is it just a flick a switch here or there? That's mutar. And I assume that we're talking about irrigation, that if it doesn't take place now, the crop will be harmed in some way. So that would be mutar.
Thank you. I don't think we have Shlomo on the call, so I think we'll move on to the next question, which is from Dov Teichman in Cedarhurst, New York. Should one wear a four-cornered garment, a tallit katan, all day in order to fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzit? And if so, is there any preference to what material, for example, wool or cotton?
There is a mahaloket, both in the Talmud and amongst the Rishonim, whether all materials are hayav b'tzitzit min Torah, without distinction, or alternatively, whether only wool and linen are hayav min Torah, and other materials are only hayav b'divrei sefarim, in order that people are used to wearing tzitzit, and that people should be aware of the mitzvah and not forget about it, etc. And that even if someone happens to wear almost all the time clothing not made of wool or linen, he will nevertheless perform the mitzvah. So there is such a machloket. Rambam and Rif and others hold that only wool and linen are hayav min Torah, and all other materials are hayav b'divrei sefarim. But many Rishonim, such as the Tosafot and the Rosh and the Reed and the Riaz and others, are of the opinion that the opinion of the majority of the Amoraim in the Sugya Masechet Menachot is that all materials, all fabrics are hayav min Torah equally. So this includes silk, cotton, etc. My view is that the halacha is that all materials, all fabrics are hayav min Torah. So a person can, if they wish, wear a beged made of wool or cotton or what have you, whatever material they wish. I would like to add, however, that if we're talking about a tallit katan, what's called a tallit katan or tallit katana, the real question is not so much the material, as I've just explained, but really the shiur, in other words, the size. Many, if not most, of these kinds of talitot ktanot that people wear are not the requisite size. The minimum requisite size, in my view, is 120 centimeters by 60 centimeters. 120 meters length, 60 centimeters in width. And that, I think, is the bare minimum. I don't think you can get away with less than that. Some talitot ketanot might be of that size, but I know that many are not. And I want to mention that and stress that point, because if a person is going to be bother, so to speak, of performing this mitzvah, then they should do it, be aware of this fact, and therefore perform it in such a way that they're actually performing the mitzvah. Anything smaller than that, I'm afraid, is not hayav b'tzitzit, and there's no mitzvah in wearing it.
However, on the question, I mean, I think part of the question that Dov was asking was whether wearing, fulfilling the mitzvah of tzitzit all day is something that one should be doing.
Okay. The simple answer to that question is that one should. Rambam writes, for example, let me see if I can quote it quickly. Rambam writes at the end of the third perek of Hilchot Tzitzit, אף על פי שאין אדם מחויב לקנות tallit ולהתעטף בה, even though there is no chova to purchase a garment which has four corners in order to place tzitzit on it and wear it, if one doesn't have such a garment. And ראוי לאדם חסיד, it is not proper for a pious person לפטור עצמו ממצווה זו, to simply exempt himself from this mitzvah. אלא לעולם ישתדל להיות עטוף בכסות המחויבת בציצית. The person should try always to wear a garment which is חייב בציצית, כדי שיקיים מצווה זו, in order to perform this mitzvah. Rambam adds, ובשעת התפילה, and more particularly, צריך להיזהר ביותר, during tefillah. This refers to all tefillot, shaharit, minha, and arvit even. That it is proper if a person can, this is the proper minhag, says Rambam, to wear a tallit during tefillah. Rambam even says, Genai gadolhu letamid hakochavim sheitpalel v'hu eino atuf. It is considered unseemly for a tamid hakochavim, which means what we call today ben Torah or yeshiva bocha, to daven any Shmoneh Esrei without wearing a tallit. So says Rambam. I'm not saying everybody does this, but this is what Rambam says, and I think it is very, very good advice indeed. Rambam also adds at the very end of this perek, the person should be particularly careful about misvat tzitzit. As it says, so the answer clearly is that one should try to do so. However, are there situations where a person is not required to do so? Yes. First of all, we have to state that even with regards to a mitzvah min ha-Torah, where it is a positive obligation to do something, such as living, being, or sleeping, eating in a sukkah during Sukkot, or wearing tefillin all day, these are both mitzvot min ha-Torah. Nevertheless, the halacha is that if a person is mista'ir, he is patur. In other words, if it's terribly hot outside in the sukkah, for example, it's not raining, so raining is something else. You can't really sit in the sukkah if it's raining. In fact, it's not even clear there's any mitzvah at all to sit in the sukkah or to sleep in the sukkah if it's raining on you. But you can sleep or eat in the sukkah or sit there and talk to your friend. All of these are a mitzvah during Sukkot. You can do it if it's very hot, but you're very uncomfortable and you're suffering. And the halacha states if a person is mista'ir, if it's very difficult and uncomfortable, he's patur, he doesn't have to do this right now. This is true even of a mitzvah like tefillin, which is a much more obvious chova than tzitzit, because tzitzit is a chova only if you happen to have a garment with four corners and you wish to wear that garment right now, etc. So, in certain circumstances, for reasons due to the weather, shall we say, or other reasons, medical reasons, a person may have a certain skin condition or something which, if he wears more layers he wears on himself, the more this skin condition is exacerbated, what have you. In such situations, a person is patur. What can one do? One can try and wear a cooler material for the tallit, whether it's katan or gadol. As we said before, I think that any material is chayav min Torah. So if you can come up with a beged that is made of cotton, there are many talitot katanot out there made of cotton, and in fact you could also even have a talit gadola made of cotton if you wanted to. There are many types of cotton out there. One could purchase it. One could find such material and make a talit gadola. Certainly there are talitot katanot made of cotton, which is probably the most comfortable material to wear in a hot climate. So if it's possible, yes, one should make such an effort, yes, as we just read from the Rambam.
Is there any technical issur or any technical problem with being the only person in Beth Knesset or Beth Midrash wearing a tallit? Is there an issue? Is there an issue of yuara or of being? I mean, yuara basically, or being different from everyone else?
All right. Well, that's also a good question. I'll tell you briefly the following story. Many years ago, I went to the home of Hagaon Rabbi Pinchas Scheinberg, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, in Kriyat Matesdorf in Yerushalayim. And I spoke to him about something, and he was wearing tefillin, which was his all day, that was his minhag, and so was I. And there was another person who entered the room and asked Rav Scheinberg, what does he think about the fact that I was wearing tefillin? This was going back 25 or 30 years ago. And what he said as follows. He said, it's true there's a mitzvah to wear tefillin all day. As you see, I'm doing this, but you should know that many people will see you wearing tefillin outside the normal hours as most people do, and they will say to themselves, this person is some kind of a sociopath. He doesn't want to relate to other people in a positive way. He's antisocial or something along those lines. The reason he said this was simply to make me aware of something which, as it happens, I was completely aware anyhow, that there are people like that out there. They see that you're doing something different from themselves, and they don't like it. Some people are very uncomfortable when there's someone else acting differently from themselves. They think everyone has to behave like they are behaving, or like most people behave. And if someone stands out, then this is someone that is proper or is reasonable, it's acceptable to relate to that person negatively. Are there such people? Yes, there are. Are there maybe even many people like that? That's true. So that's not a halachic question. That's a sociological question. Do you care what other people think about you or not? Or to what extent do you care? That's a question which I cannot answer for anybody. That's up to the person. If a person knows what they want to do, it's clear to them how they wish to live their lives, and they will not be influenced. They refuse to be dictated to by others how they should run their lives. Then they will act in a certain way with regards to tefillin or tzitzit or 101 other things. And if they're like most people, because it is human nature to go with the flow, to fit in with the crowd, then they are likely to be influenced by such considerations. Having said that, I can tell you that the Gra writes or B'Shem HaGra, it is written in Ma'aseh Rav, that one should wear tefillin all day and one should not be Hoshesh Yuhara. Says that explicitly. That was the Gra's position. But again, not everyone is able to work that way, or to live their lives that way. I saw on the chat now somebody asked a question about keeping tefillin on during mussaf of Rosh Chodesh, correct? Is that what I just saw?
I didn't see that, but it's definitely something that's come up in the group.
Someone just asked that question. All right, well, generally, the answer is that one should wear tefillin during mussaf of Rosh Chodesh. There is no valid reason to remove the tefillin before mussaf. This notion, this practice is based on convoluted, supposedly Kabbalistic thinking. It's not even mentioned the Zohar or anything like that, but that's the basis, that's the origin of of that practice, and therefore I do not think it's valid at all. However, if it is likely to lead to a mahloket in the Beit Knesset, if you keep the tefillin on during Musaf, then I would recommend not doing so, because we wish to prevent and avoid mahloket in the Beit Knesset. Or mahlokot, as it says in the Mishnah in Pesachim. I will also add that another solution, which many years ago, when I davened in a certain minyan, I knew it would cause a mahloket if I kept on my tefillah shel rosh. So I removed my tefillah shel rosh, and I kept on the tefillah shel yad hidden under my sleeve, as it were, under my jacket, and no one knew it was there, and it didn't bother anybody, and that was fine. So that's also a possible way of dealing with that situation. And I will tell you further, in conclusion, on this point, that exactly 1 week ago, that is to say, Friday morning last week, Rosh Chodesh Adar, I was in Arunei Bashan, and I was in the minyan in the yishuv, and I was looking at the minyan and the people who were there, and it seemed to me that it wouldn't really bother anybody. That was my impression. That was my intuition, that it would not bother anybody if I kept my tefillin on during mussaf. And that's what I did. And guess what? No one remarked. No one said a word. In fact, the Rav of the yishuv came up to me after mussaf and greeted me, and he was very warm and very pleasant. And I didn't know him. He apparently knew me. And we had a lovely conversation, and everything was fine. No one seemed to be perturbed in the least. So sometimes you have to sort of gauge the situation. In that case, my intuition was correct.
Thank you. The next question is from David Newman in Shalvim. I'll jump one. Chaim in Buchin. If during the summer I feel too hot with a tallit katan in wool, can I wear a tallit katan made of linen with tzitzit in linen but without tefillin?
Right. So this is very much connected to the previous question. So in the summer when it's very hot, wearing a woolen tallit katana can very often be difficult and unpleasant. So what can one do? So wearing a beged made of linen, pishtim, in theory is possible. But first of all, I would point out you have to make this yourself. You would have to order this and manufacture it yourself, because you will not find any such beged made of pishtan commercially available. Second of all, with regards to a tallit of any size, katan, gadol, made of pishtan, of linen, there actually is a big mahloket amongst the Rishonim. According to the Rif, Rashi, Rambam, the Ramban, it is mutar to place tzitzit made of pishtan, of linen, on a beged made of linen. It's mutar. You're not allowed to place techeret on such a beged, according to this opinion, because the techeret is made of wool, and there was a gezerah not to do so, even though in Torah it's mutar. But if you place only white tzitzit made of linen on a beged made of linen, it's mutar, according to this opinion. But there is also another opinion, which is held by many of the Kadmonim, Rav Hai Gaon, Rav Sharira Gaon, Rabbeinu Tam, the Rosh, the Reed, the Riaz, that is asur to place any kind of tzitzit, even just white strings made of linen, or in general, a linen beged is patur mitzitzit, midivrei sefarim, and you don't place any tzitzit on it. And the truth is, this is this sugya is actually somewhat obscure, and it's difficult to. I feel it's difficult to nail it down and be very definitive about it. So I would say, even though yesh al mili smoch, there are definitely some Rishonim who say it's mutar to do so, a beged of linen beged with linen tzitzit. There are also Rishonim who say it's asur. My suggestion would be not to do so, but to wear a beged made of cotton, which is also comfortable in the summer. And to place on a cotton beged, you may place woolen tzitzit, or you could also place tzitzit made of linen or something, or cotton, if you have such tzitzit. But again, those are not commonly commercially available. I also saw there was a question someone asked about the mesh kind of material, which is a synthetic material which has holes in it, and it's supposedly cooler in the summer. Is it mutar to wear that and to perform the mitzvah? I think it is. I think it is mutar if it is of the requisite size.
Thank you. We've got a question now from David Newman in Shelvim. Is it possible to wash one's hands normally with soap and water after netilat yadayim for hamoed, or does this count as a hefsek?
It is definitely mutar to do so. It is not a hefsek, and as some of you may know, in my view, it is also mutar to speak after netilat yadayim. It is not a so to speak, as long as one is not meseah hatada'at. In other words, if one washed one's hands and one knows that one's shortly about to say hamoed, you may say something to somebody. You're not required to be silent until you say hamoed. As long as you don't completely forget that you washed your hands and you're about to eat bread, as long as you're still mindful of that, it's mutar. Certainly washing one's hands with soap is not a problem.
Thank you. We've got an anonymous question. Many halakhic sources seem to prohibit listening to music altogether. For example, the Shulchan Aruch, if I'm not mistaken. What is the Rav's position on this issue?
It's true that that's what the Shulchan Aruch, that is to say, Rabbi Yosef Karo writes. It's also true that Rabbi Moshe Yisrael Rama writes the opposite, based on the Tosafot. In other words, the Shulchan Aruch is following the opinion of the Rif and the Rambam. The Rama is following the opinion of Rashi and Tosafot. Based on the Sughiyot, this is also a Sughiyah which is, I would say, not had mashma'i. It's difficult to claim that there's only one possible interpretation of the Sughiyot. But I would say as follows: two things. First of all, we see in reality that all of Am Yisrael, now and for a long time, I think, for many generations, listen to music. Even Sfaradim who lichora follow the Shulchan Aruch and not the Rama, we see that this is what people are doing. And Hanach lahem Yisrael, as Chazal say, allow the Jews to continue doing as they are doing. Number one. Number two, I would add that I have a good friend who is both a Talmid Chachamim and is also a musician. He's a songwriter. And he told me decades ago that he spoke on more than one occasion. He used to speak frequently to a certain great Rav by the name of Hagon Rabbi Yisrael Fisher, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He was a very great Chacham, and he was also outspoken and Hadshan. He was not unwilling to express views that were not the mainstream, shall we say. One example would be that he said that pregnant women should not fast, even on Tisha B'Av, because we see practically that the number of women who go into labor, sometimes prematurely, as a result, is significant. The numbers, the statistics are there to show that it happens, not just very rarely. Even though the Gemara says explicitly that pregnant women should fast on Tisha B'Av. But to get back to our topic at hand, with regards to music, he said to my friend as follows, that whatever the halacha is, I mean, as we said, there are different opinions. The fact is, people today need music. In other words, psychologically, spiritually, people are used to hearing music and people need music. If you were to tell people you cannot hear music, it would be a gezerah she'en ha'tzibur yachol la'amod ba, and it would lead to people being somewhat despondent, depressed, what have you. And I think that's true. And the reason for that, I think, is also quite obvious. Once upon a time, music was obviously only played live, and generally was played at some kind of festive, joyous occasion, a wedding, any other simha. So music was naturally associated with simha, with festivity, with celebration. But nowadays, and for a long time already, that is not the case. We hear music in all kinds of situations. Frequently, we hear music in the background in our cars, in different situations. We're used to hearing music, and it's not necessarily associated with celebration or anything of the sort. It's just sort of some natural, normal activity. And I think that is a powerful and correct argument and observation. Of course, if a person does not want to listen to music because of the Hurban, it's obviously possible, and perhaps even tavu'alo baracha. But I do not think this should be presented to people, generally speaking, as an halachic requirement.
Thank you, Harav. Question now from an anonymous question. It's quite long, so I'm not going to read it all out. But the gist of the question is it mutar to read sefarim hitzonim, particularly Ben Sira?
Yes, I see the question before me, and I cannot and don't wish to answer this question in this forum. The person in question, I would request turn to me privately, because I think the answer has to, in order to respond to this question, I think one has to know exactly who we're speaking about and many other details in the background of the situation, the circumstances, the religious level, and the personality of the individual in question. It's therefore not a question that I think I should or could answer in this forum.
Very well, thank you. The next question is from Talia Freitag. When I purchase from a farmer who hires a shochet to shech the meat, is it enough to rely on the shochet's ta'udah? There is no hechsher on the meat like in the grocery store. What considerations or questions do I need to know or ask before buying meat in this way? I cannot speak directly with the shochet. Is there a list of farmers and or shochtim who have already been checked, who I can purchase from?
Okay, well, first of all, let us state clearly that any product that we buy which has some kind of hechsher printed on it or stuck onto it, attached to it in some way, it may well be kosher, and we hope generally that if it says so, that it is, and that we're not being misled. But really, that is second best. That is what I mean to say is that ideally, if we know where the food that we wish to eat comes from, we know who prepared it, who grew it, or who shechted it, etc. That's the ideal. The ideal situation is that you know the person, you know the shochet yourself, and therefore you don't have to ask any questions. You know who he is, or you know some other people that you can rely on. Let's say you know a Rav who tells you, I know this shochet, he's okay, he's fine. Then it makes no difference if the meat from his shahita is officially certified by someone or not, as long as you know for a fact that this person is reliable. I can tell you, as it happens, that about 3 weeks ago, I went to a certain farm not far from where I live, and I witnessed the shahita of a couple of sheep, and I met the shochet for the first time, and I spoke to him at some length, and I saw how he checked his knives. I myself checked the knife, and I saw that this individual is he struck me and looked like a very proper and God-fearing Jew. I also spoke to him at some length about related questions, And it was very clear to me this person is very expert, very reliable, he really knows his stuff. He did nikur, I saw how he did it. I saw the shahita. He's really an expert. No, beyond that, I don't need to, if I know that meat comes from this person, I don't need to see anything else. That's the ideal situation. That's preferable in every way to buying something from a supermarket that has a stamp on it that says it's kasher, because you didn't see it, you don't know. You're being told by someone, and you don't know that person perhaps either very well, but apparently it's kasher, and that's what's being claimed. And we always hope, of course, that there's no monkey business going on, although these things also happen. It should be stated. The ideal is really when you know the shochet, you see the people in if you actually witness it yourself and you know the source of the meat, you know the shochet, you see it being butchered. That's the very best way in the world. And as it happens, as Hashem would have it, earlier today, I actually purchased some meat from that shahita. It was brought to me today. If a person cannot speak to the shochet himself for whatever reason, then you should hopefully be able to find someone who does know this shochet, someone that you feel that you can trust and you can rely on. If they tell you this person is entirely above board and he knows, he's an expert and he's reliable, that's fine. That's how it always was in Am Yisrael. It's only in recent generations that with industrial food production, large-scale operations, and people being so far from the source of the food that you usually do not know who the shochet was, you don't know who raised the cattle or the chicken or what have you. So then we have a system which comes to replace the old school, more traditional way of seeing and doing and knowing these things. So if if a person knows the source of the meat, you know where it comes from, and you know who the shochet is, and you have every reason to believe that he is reliable and God-fearing, then you can definitely purchase that meat.
Thank you. Talia, did you have anything to be clarified on that?
Yes, thank you, Harav. So I just have one question. So I do not know anyone directly who knows a shochet. I spoke with the farmer. The farmer lives in Gush Etzion, and he said that he knows the shochet, and he said that he feels that he is very reliable, and that it is probably more kosher, so to speak, than what you would find in the supermarket. But he said I should ask a Rav first, and I asked for the teudah of the shochet. So I have that. Of course, it's all in Hebrew. I don't read Hebrew. I don't speak Hebrew either. So that's why I'm asking the questions. So yeah, so that's.
Well, first of all, if you rely on this farmer, this individual who says that he knows the shochet and he tells you that he's reliable, if you think that he is a totally reliable and God-fearing Jew, then you can accept what he says.
Okay.
If beyond that, if there's a teudah that the shochet has and you cannot read it yourself, or you don't know the source of it, who signed it, where does it come from, you can probably ask for someone who does know, or who can read it, or who can look into it, to tell you if the teudah looks, kasher and beyond any doubt. I imagine it is, but it's something that one can ascertain. But from what you tell me, I would not be too concerned. As long as the person you're in touch with seems to you, as far as you know, is a reliable, God-fearing Jew, then there should not be a problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Hara.
Bakasha.
Thank you. However, we've gone over the hour. Are we able to carry on with the questions?
Well, I suggest, in actual fact, that what we do at this point is that we perhaps stop here for today, and perhaps we can deal with the remaining questions next time, which perhaps could be in 2 weeks' time.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Harav.
All right. Tov. So I'm pleased that we were able to have this session, and I hope that the questions that we answered the answers were clear and straightforward. חזקו ויאמץ לבבכם כל המייחלים לאדוני, היו ברוכים.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.